the tip of the day to just press it once. So I think that's recording. So let's get started. So welcome everyone to our On the Couch session. This is the second one that we've held, and we're looking at doing them every couple of months just as a way of connecting up people and providing an opportunity for friends of the college like Brian to come and have a conversation about their journey towards becoming a psychologist and since then what it means to them and the work that they're doing. So as you would have read Brian's bio, he's pretty interesting, I think. So there's a few questions that we can explore around that whole process and the learnings, and then some tips and ideas for people as well. And we will have some time for questions. So really looking forward to having some conversation. So thanks very much, Brian. It's nice to meet you. This is the first time that we've actually met. We've only had conversations by email. So this is just the first time we're really getting to have a conversation. So you've already set out a little bit in your bio about your journey towards becoming a psychologist. So you began as an actor. So I guess I'm interested in where the acting came from, because there's probably elements around psychology and acting that could be a bit linked, or I'm wondering if that's the case. So where did acting come from, the idea to become an actor? Let's start with that.
Yeah, it's funny, and about the link, because I always get when I tell people that I used to be an actor and then moved into psychology, they go, "Oh my God, that's so weird. That's so, that's a weird combination." But I actually don't think it is that weird. I think to your point, Lynn, there are some little crossovers, so it'd be interesting to discuss those. I'll also say it is the first time we've met, Lynn, obviously, but I have had a couple of my supervisees rave about your group supervision sessions. You've had something to do with you. And
thank you.
Oh my God, Lynn's amazing, and she knows all about suicide, and she's really good. She's written books and blah blah blah.
Oh, so thank you. That's good to hear.
So your wealth of knowledge and experience precedes you. Acting, it came out of nowhere. There's no one else in my family who'd ever done it. I come from a long line of chartered accountants and teachers, and I was the fourth child, and I was supposed to go to uni and study accountancy or law or teaching or something sensible, and I said, screw this, and I went to acting school, much to my father's in particular chagrin. And even when I went to acting school, I thought, well, this isn't going to last. It's a silly profession. And I didn't go to a big fancy pants acting school like NIDA or Victoria College of the Arts or WAPA, which are the main ones. I went to a little place called Theatre Nepean out at University of Western Sydney in Penrith, kind of a North Shore boy grown up in Killara, which is the Toorak version for those in Melbourne. So a bit upper bourgeois, middle class boy out to Penrith, where I learned a lot of life lessons as much as acting lessons. And so it came out of nowhere. If anything, it came out of a desire to meet girls when I was a teenage boy at an all-boys school going. And it seemed to be there seemed to be a ratio of about 8 girls to 1 boy. So the odds were good. So that's what took me to acting mainly. But wow. I think there is a connection to psychology, but we can get back to that. We can come back to that.
Yeah, wow, that's a really interesting way to start. It reminds me, my daughter left her school in year 12. She was really disengaged and wanted to do acting. So we found a school which was in Melbourne, a William Bates Academy it was called, and been going for 30 years. Oh. And so I got her out of the school. I worked in the education department, so I was able to get her into a distance ed sort of stuff. So I was able to navigate that space, which is often quite difficult. So she had this timetable where she'd be going to the William Bates Academy so many days a week, and she'd be doing homeschooling to finish year 12. We thought, okay, we'll see how this goes. Well, within a week of her starting, William Bates Academy went broke. So they took our $1,000 payment and then they went broke. So didn't kind of go as planned. Anyway, she's a lawyer now, so we found our way. She found her way. Yeah. So
yes, well, Theatre Nepean also went bust. So it also collapsed.
Yeah. That's interesting. So, yeah, so I guess it is sort of an interesting connection. Do you see now there is a connection between acting and psychology? Do you sort of see that there is, even if it wasn't obvious?
Yeah, it took me a long time. And I think I had, you know how we have cultural cringe in Australia? That notion, which maybe isn't the case so much now, but it used to be the case when I was in my 20s. And, you know, myself and my friends, we traveled overseas, and there was a real sense of that's where the culture is, that's where life is, overseas, Europe, not Australia. And I think similarly with acting, there was a bit of cringe factor I had, a bit of embarrassment that I spent my first 20, well, in my 20s and 30s, that was my life as an actor. And I kind of disowned that going into psychology. I was a bit embarrassed about that history, because I wanted to be a serious psychologist, because that's what I was now. I'm a serious psychologist, not a frivolous actor. But it took me a while to kind of embrace that side of me. And so now I'm very happy when I'm working as a psychologist to introduce myself when I run through my 1 minute spiel to go, oh, I used to be an actor, I used to be in the performing arts and blah, blah, blah. And the link for me now, I think, is a couple of things. One, as an actor, you're constantly studying behavior and trying to work out why people do what they do, to step into those shoes, and to play that part. And also, you're always reading your fellow actors on stage. You're watching their body language, and interpreting what they're saying as much as what they're not saying, as much as what they're saying. And so I think that's a strong component. And I think the other one is, I'm sure, well, I imagine you've been the same, Lynn, but there's certainly times when I'm in sessions and I do some workshops, but when I'm acting my pants off to get through a session, where it's very difficult, but I'm having to kind of put on my acting hat to get through something. But I think mostly the connection is behavior, understanding behavior, and understanding and thinking about why people do what they do.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And what was it how did you make that decision that I'm going to stop acting and become a psychologist? Like, what was that process, and how long did that take you to kind of decide that?
Well, that was a funny one as well. And I think I had a dear friend, one of my best friends in Melbourne. So I spent about 2 or 3 years living in Melbourne myself, doing shows down there. I used to do musicals, and had a great mate. And we traveled through Africa together, and she was a psychologist, and she was brilliant. She's a psychoanalytical Freudian psychologist, psychoanalyst. And we'd have lots of arguments about psychology. And I would say arrogantly, I think at the time, psychologists, you can't help anyone. You know, people who are what they are, people who be what they're going to be. You can't help anyone. So why do you even bother? Why do you even try? And you spend years with someone. That's crazy. So we'd have these arguments, and I would come from a position of ignorance, complete ignorance. And so I dismissed psychology quite haphazardly, out of hand, in my early 20s. But then found myself as an actor doing corporate role playing and working with organizational psychologists. And that was fascinating. And I found it extraordinary, and they were brilliant. These, I was going to say these women, because they were all women that I was working with, it seemed. And they were extraordinary women, incredible minds. And at the same time, as I started to do this work as a corporate role player, I was traveling around the country. We just had our first child, and it was just becoming too fraught, traveling around the country and trying to maintain a career and with a young family. And my wife was suddenly at home with our young baby, all of a sudden a single mum, which she'd never asked for and I'd never wanted. And so those two roads collided. One, the family life of this is too hard, this acting business is just too hard, with hey, wow, this psychology stuff is kind of interesting. It's kind of cool. And so from there, fairly naively, I went back to uni. And I say naively because I'm a bit hopeless in many respects. I don't actually look ahead very well, and I had no idea. I don't think I had any idea. I'm pretty sure this is the case that you had to do 2 years after you did 4 years. So I thought I just went to uni and did 4 years and became a psychologist. I had no idea that I had to then do the 2 years afterwards. But I think if I knew that, I wouldn't have done it. Because the 6 years actually took me about 6.5, 6.75 years. And by that time, I was 37, 30. And so it was a funny old thing. But I'm glad I didn't know, because I'm glad I didn't.
I'm thinking of some of our interns perhaps listening to that going, yeah, we kind of get that extra 2 years is kind of where right now. And yeah, what a really long time. Yeah, and especially if you've had you've already been doing something, you've had a career in something, and then you sort of start again, and it's such a long time. So yeah, I'm very glad that you did do that, because it does sound like you've had lots to offer in terms of a bit more creative than perhaps psychology might typically be seen. So, psychologists are often expected to be kind of, sort of evidence-based and serious and, kind of big responsibility that comes with that. But it sounds, I get a sense from you that you kind of, there's a bit more creativity perhaps that you bring to your work than perhaps we get from our psychology training. Would that be fair to say?
It's fair to say, but I'm still trying to work that out, of how to bring that creativity into the practice, because it does feel more often than not a pretty serious practice. It's very rare that it's kind of a creative freewheeling session that you might have, be it coaching or counselling. The where I have been able to bring it in is definitely in the facilitation of workshops. That's been an area I can bring it in, but I'm still, and I know there's a way I can bring it in, but I haven't worked it out yet. But I'm still working out a way to bring in that free creative acting world into one-on-one sessions. I haven't mastered that at all, but I think there's something there.
I often feel the same way, because I do enjoy writing, and I often find I've been in writing groups with other psychologists. Like, it's quite interesting that sometimes people that do writing, psychologists are often people that do writing and creative writing. And it's been interesting that I've been in a workshop kind of group with other psychologists is quite interesting in terms of what is it that we're doing here, and that sense of drawing on psychology and trying to make it into something that's creative, and what do you kind of bring to that, but the tendency sometimes to overthink what we're doing if we're being so creative. So that's sort of the flip side of that as well, I guess. And I often find in my work, because I've only returned to private practice in the last year and a half really, so I'm finding the same thing in sessions. Even with kids, it doesn't seem to be a lot of time to be terribly creative compared to when I worked in schools and would do some workshops, or I had a bit more time with kids where I could catch up with them in a different way. And now I feel like that under Medicare, there's certain kind of constraints around that. I feel like my time is very pressured, and perhaps my energy, and manage my energy across a day is quite difficult as well, that you have to kind of pace yourself a little bit. So I wonder if it is that 50-minute session idea, or sort of seeing multiple people in a day, that crushes some of our ability to be creative in the way it's set up at the moment.
Yeah, and I think so. And I think when I think of creativity, I think of lightness. And when I think of a lot of sessions, it's often heavy. The nature of them is heavy. And so it's hard to bring lightness, and I'm not very good at it, I don't think. So if we can bring lightness into a session, then that's a wonderful start for creativity to build on that. But it's hard to do that. A lot of our stuff is kind of heavy.
And I guess there's a risk of making it light can be dismissive of this experience. So you're walking this tightrope, aren't you, of trying to kind of hear what they're saying and work with them and take seriously what they say, and not be too light-hearted. I did do a little writing activity with a client recently, and it kind of went on for a while, where we were talking about being an animal. What would she write if she was an animal? And so we used the metaphor of, a mouse compared to a lyrebird at one stage, and that was quite, because she picked these animals, and it became quite funny. But then I kind of got stuck after a while. I thought, well, where do we keep going? Because she sort of lost the thread a little bit. So I felt like, is this me pushing this, because I'm finding it interesting, or is she kind of, it's reached its kind of threshold now that we need to kind of get back to more serious stuff? But it was quite funny for a little while, the idea of, the lyrebird and the tail and, sort of being seen compared to the mouse hiding away. And it worked for a little while as, metaphors. But yeah, I didn't quite feel like I was able to work it to its full extent. So I'm a bit like you with the work in progress to try to be a bit more creative. So you did this work for a while then. I feel like this is a bit like This Is My Life, where you're kind of going back to the timeline of your life. So you kind of then got through you were at the college as well for those 2 years, the 4 plus 2 years. You did the college. Yeah. So you did the 4 years, then you did the college diploma.
Yeah.
How did you find that? Like, what was...
Brilliant.
I imagine it was a challenge after your 4 years, and then you...
brilliant. It wasn't a problem at all to do it. Once I was knowing I had to do it to execute this, I tell my supervisees to do this. I just say, lap it up. When are you going to get 2 years of just constant supervision once a week, be able to tell all your shit to, just kind of go all your stuff. And I had some awesome, and I was lucky enough to have Lawrence for about a year. And man, I learned a lot. And so and Gemma Jenkins and Anne, I can't remember her surname. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I had 4. I managed to change supervisees 3 times. So I had 4, and I loved it. I loved discussing work challenges, and I had plenty at the time. I was lucky enough to get work as a psychologist, as an intern psychologist, straight out of uni. So just as I started COP, and so discuss work issues, discuss some personal issues, and I just brain suck. I loved it. COP. I thought it was really cool, and very lucky. I'm very, very mindful for those of us who went through our internship, well, I don't know, must be 15 years ago or whatever, how different it is, how much easier it was, which is not great to hear if you're a supervisee now. Yippee, great. It was easier in my day. Thanks for that. But yeah, it was so much easier. And I really feel for the guys today. There's just so much more boxes to tick, all the case reports and everything, and the observed sessions. But so I felt very lucky. I really enjoyed it. It was good.
Did you change jobs in that 2 years? Or did you stay with the one internship role?
Job. So I stayed. I'm not very adventurous or entrepreneurial, or I just stick to things. That's having said that, I've just contradicted my existence, where my last 7 years has been just working for myself. But anyway, I stayed in the same job for 7 years.
Yeah. Okay. So you didn't leave. Like, I know for some interns, people are just wanting to get out of there, get to your registration, and then that's it. Now start again. But you were able to keep that and maintain that beyond the actual internship period.
Yeah, I was very lucky. I ended up working with 2 great women. Again, I keep saying great women. It felt like my entire psychological history has really been based around working with great women. I know there's more women than men in the game. So, and I guess we can talk about why that is, but it makes reasonable sense about about understanding people and behavior and emotional intelligence, why that might be the case. There's more women than men. But anyway, I worked with 2 great women. I think they went through COP, Andrea Croft and Charmaine Burke. I think they did. Lawrence would attest to that. I think they did.
Yes, they did.
They did. Yeah.
There we go. And, community. Yeah. This is.
So they went through COP, and I was very lucky because I was a bit scared. I've never had a real job as an actor, and I was a bit scared about what my new life would look like. But I was very fortunate. I got to work from home a lot. I started to work 4 days a week, and so I didn't have to go all corporate, because I was working at that time in organizational psychology. I'm not an endorsed organizational psychologist, but that's the field I've worked in mostly. Now I do a few different things, but I worked there, and then I went from there and went into my big serious corporate job, which was another consultancy, which is wonderful. But then it all went pear-shaped. I spent 2 years there. Again, great people, wonderful company. My first male mentor, I haven't had wonderful female mentors, my first male mentor, and more in organizational psychology. But then I crashed and burnt, and various reasons, I think, behind that. But that was my first foray into my, so it took me till I was about 42, 43, 44 before I was going in, having my first real job, wearing a suit, and you know, having my office and that sort of stuff. But it didn't work out so well.
Yeah, it strikes me that you went into acting to meet women, but you should have gone into psychology to start with, and you would have met women.
Yes, exactly. I wasted all that time doing
That's
that.
right, wasted all that time acting.
Songs, dancing around the stage.
Yeah. One of the questions I'm always interested in is our self-care as psychologists, and I guess you've very open around the crash and burn experience that you had, and then it sounds like you're kind of drawing on that now and using that lived experience, which is a really interesting topic at the moment, isn't it? Because there's so much talk about lived experience and an assumption that mental health professionals don't have it in some way, that you've either got lived experience or you're a mental health professional. So we might talk about that. But I guess, you know, in terms of looking back now, were there early signs that perhaps you would now be aware of, that just in terms of letting, you know, our interns sort of think about what are the sorts of things that we need to look out for? And I guess things are, you know, the internship is obviously very demanding, but workplaces and beyond the internship are also demanding. So are there sort of signs that you look back on now and you can see, you know, perhaps that was the point, or they were a few things building up that I perhaps could have done something a bit earlier to avoid it getting to that point?
Yeah, I haven't thought, I've actually never thought about early warning signs until you've asked that question right now. So I'll do my best to answer it without knowing that I'll probably won't nail it. But looking back, I think the early signs were just sudden this sense of fear, this sense of imposter syndrome and catastrophizing and fear around things that had hitherto, is that the right word? Had previously been quite comfortable, quite capable, things that you could previously deal with quite capably. All of a sudden you couldn't. I couldn't. I couldn't make the most basic decisions. So cognitive, there were some cognitive signs of and emotional signs of just fear, and cognitive signs of just extraordinary self-doubt, and there were some physiological signs of classic anxiety, tension in chest and jaw, and yeah, just a lot of self-doubt and worrying of fears and worries, and no longer loving things that you loved previously. I loved previously.
Yeah. So some fairly classic signs, I guess, if we're looking at symptoms of anxiety, depression type symptoms. So what was that like then? As this was happening and you were working as a psychologist, what was that like? Was it a bit jarring to be thinking this is sort of starting to happen to me, or did it happen quite quickly?
It was very jarring, and it was an incredible shock. And I was arrogant enough. 3 years earlier, I remember a conversation with a colleague talking about another colleague, It's interesting you talk about psychologists and those of us in the helping profession. I think I've done looked at a little bit of research, and I think we're up there with farmers and parents as being people who experience burnout more often than most in terms of professions. Us helping professions, including nurses and doctors and psychologists. But I remember having this conversation 3 years earlier, and this colleague was going through a terrible time and was experiencing her own levels of anxiety. And I was talking with this other colleague, and I was going, I feel really lucky, I remember saying. I don't think this will ever happen to me.
Oh.
You know, I've got an incredible wife, beautiful kids. I live in a beautiful country. You know, I'm lucky as things are so great. And I don't see that changing. Fast forward mere 2 or 3 years, and it was full on. When it got as dark as it can get.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I guess it is important for us to hear those stories, though, isn't it? That it can happen to psychologists as much as anybody. It's an important story. And I know Tim Sharp, who is Dr. Happy, positive psychology. He's very open these days around his own experiences of mental illness, and I think he on his Twitter. He calls himself Dr. Not Always, in brackets, Happy or something. So he's got some way of sort of acknowledging that idea that being Dr. Happy is probably not the most helpful title. But yeah, do you make decisions now around sharing this? I know it's in your bio fairly openly, but do you kind of make decisions around how much to share, when to share, in terms of being a psychologist and having this experience? How do you make decisions around that?
Yeah, I found it's a good question, because there's also the danger of oversharing, isn't there? And I'm really aware of not oversharing, not wanting to overshare, and it's all about me. I mean, obviously today is a little bit about me, so
well, it's all about you, really.
but so when I do share and when I don't share. When I do share, I share. Some of the work I've done is in workshops, Workplace Mental Health Institute. And I do workshops on resilience and mental health first aid, or resilience for people, or a masterclass for leaders to help them build better teams and more resilient, mentally wealthier workplaces. I always share my story there, because I want to instill in the room a sense of trust and a sense of safety and a sense of, hey, it's okay. 1 in 3.5 of us are probably suffering from a mental health issue at any one time. That's 4 of us in this room, and this is my experience. And so I find it really important to share there, and it's very easy to share there. I share with my supervisees, really easy and happy to share with them. Where I haven't yet shared, I also do a bit of counselling and coaching. And I don't share in counselling or coaching. I have once or twice in counselling. And I'm because I'm just nervous of not because I'm not comfortable sharing. I'm comfortable sharing with anyone. But I'm nervous about, and I would take the guidance from yourself, Lynn, and other experts who know more about these sort of things in counselling than I do. I'm fairly new to counselling, and I wouldn't call myself a clinical counsellor. But yeah, I might throw the question back at you. I don't tend to disclose much in counselling, because I don't want it to be about me. But I will actually throw it back to you, Lynn, and get your thoughts on when to disclose that sort of stuff in counselling, when not to. Is it a good thing, a bad thing?
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot, really, because I guess 10 years ago we would have said that you don't really share. You've got a very, very good reason, and you really tend not to share. And I know that sometimes I have conversations with interns in supervision as well around what I don't feel comfortable with and what I do. And sometimes by saying I don't share that information, you can actually shut the person down if they're asking. There's obviously something they're interested about. So being too kind of limited and too cold, I guess, or too clinical may not be helpful. But sharing something you haven't perhaps processed yourself is probably unhelpful. Or if it's about what's the purpose of this. So if you're finding yourself, getting caught up in it and it's becoming about me, I think that's a risk, and you don't always know that till you're kind of in it. But I think there's been a real shift in recent years. I think there's much more of a push now around lived experience and in suicide prevention that I'm interested in. There's an awful lot of research coming out and a lot of push towards understanding the experience and hearing from people who've experienced suicidality and what that's been like. And I think we can learn a lot as practitioners from that. But I find that if I sort of start to share something, and I often work with parents, and so I often will share, now my kids are much older, I feel like I can share as a parent without being terribly close to it, but that's not always the case. You still have worries about your kids when they're oldest. But I sometimes find that I might just share something about that kind of normalises it. But I sometimes find that there's a point where people don't actually want to hear about you. They kind of go, okay, and so I think it's really difficult, and it's probably different for everyone, but I think there's a point where people don't really come to hear your story too much in that space. It might be different in workshops and things perhaps, but I think in that space sharing is probably, I think we've got to be really careful and probably reduce that time factor again. What are the kind of people here for, and being very purposeful around it, or to build rapport or normalise something, or perhaps an example of something that we do or a struggle that's very relevant perhaps, but then they can switch off too. They can start to think you're talking about yourself too much.
I really like what you said just then. I wrote it down. Sharing something that you haven't processed as much. So if you're still processing something, if you're still going through something, then I think that's a really tricky time to share.
Yeah.
And I reflect on when I did suffer burnout and went through a really bad patch. I kept working and kept working in all sorts of areas and delivering workshops, and that was a very difficult period to be delivering workshops on mental health and resilience and being in really suffering quite badly myself. And it was uncomfortable to share then, and rightly so. I mean, ideally, I think the other thing you asked before about warning signs for interns if they experience something like this, I think another thing that I would look back now in hindsight, and I think, I think I probably needed to take time off, 3 months, 6 months, and just stop but I kept going. But I think it's probably very hard for people to do that. People need to work, we need to earn money, and I think I'm probably was the same at the point. But I think even taking more time off, I didn't take any time off. I kept working as hard as I'd ever worked, and just kept trying to get through things. So that just came into my head then.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think it's hard and the pressures on people in workplaces and pressures on mental health systems at the moment mean that we can easily get into that trap of we need to keep working and thinking about what do we actually need in order to be here for the long haul and not have periods where we're struggling, or that we can do the best we can, but be here, in the longer term is important.
The old it's a marathon analogy.
Yeah, that's right. So what does your typical week look like at the moment then? Where has all this kind of brought you? What does a week look like now? Do you have a typical week, or are there different?
I do. And funnily enough, as of 3 months ago, I just started working back part-time at the organisation that I had my classic burnout. So really, really weird. So I managed to not burn that bridge somehow. And as I said, they're really lovely people. It just wasn't for me at the time. But I continued to work as an associate for them. So now my typical week is a little unusual. I need to pull back somewhere. So it's a bit too much at the moment. But anyway, what it is I do five-day fortnight at this organizational psychology consultancy firm, where I'll do on a Monday, Thursday, and every second Friday, I will do either personality profiling debriefs or 360 debriefs, if people know what 360s are. And if they don't, basically it's when someone does a questionnaire and they are analysed by their manager, rates them, they rate themselves, their peers rate them, their customers rate them, their team members rate them, and they get a report. So a lot of personality stuff, a lot of psychological assessment stuff, and some assessment centres like to help for development or for selection. So I'll do some org psych stuff, classic org psych stuff, and coaching. I'll do a bit of coaching as well. And then for one day, my Wednesday is my day for supervising. I currently supervise 4 interns, none of whom are on this call. I'll add shocking. I did tell them not to bother. They'll won't learn anything new, I said to them, from me.
Mine aren't really, although I think one is. Yeah, where are they all?
I think, Brian, I think I had you as a supervisor for once. A stand-in stuntman in between.
Who's that?
Cheryl.
Oh, g'day, Cheryl.
Oh, finally got on. It took me half an hour, but anyway.
G'day, Cheryl.
How are you?
I'm good. Good to see you and hear you. So that day, Wednesdays, is supervision day and also coaching day. Mm-hmm. So I also do some coaching with a company who does sports. I love sport. I love sport. So I do sports performance psychology with athletes. And so I do that. Most of that's online. And that's on a Tuesday and a Wednesday. And then every second Friday, I do counselling/coaching at Balmain Sports Medicine. And I get people in there, either athletes wanting to improve their performance or people with just classic stress, anxiety or depression. I don't tend to... I don't treat anyone with schizophrenia or very acute disorders or anything like that, but with stress or anxiety or depression, I'll treat people. But mostly it's athletes coming through, and so I do that counselling/coaching once a fortnight there. And then every now and again I'll do a workshop. Once or twice a month, or I'll do, like I said before, or a big assessment centre with some other colleagues in the organisation or the org psych space. So that's my typical week.
Yeah, okay, sounds really interesting. And I guess it's also a way for you to tap into interests. So sports sounds like it's another interest. So how fabulous to be able to kind of combine things that you enjoy and bring psychology into that, or find a way that psychology fits.
Well, half an hour before the call, Lynn, I was wearing my Swifts beanie. I'd been out to the Swifts with my daughter, Sasha, and my wife said, "You're not wearing your beanie." And I said, "Why not?" She made me take off my beanie. But I just went out. Yeah, I love sport. My Swans won and my Tigers won, and so I do love sport. And sometimes I find the marriage doesn't work so well, and that I love sport so much that I don't want to be toying around with it by getting all psyche on it. And I just want to love the sport for the sport's sake. And sometimes I find my athletes, I just want to go to them, I don't think you need me. Don't come and see me. Just go and play. Just go and enjoy it, love it, play. You don't need me. Anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes it is how much of it is your hobby, and then you lose some of it if you bring it into your work. And that's something I've often thought about in terms of some of the writing and some of the creative work. Yeah.
So have you found that with your writing?
Yeah. I find it sometimes. Well, it's interesting because I had a play performed, and it was a play that was kind of fairly autobiographical, biographical, wow. and that was pretty confronting. And it was because I used to worry about that holding things quite close and not even talking about being a psychologist in writing groups and things, and then having a play performed was quite interesting to do that, and then to bring it together and find a way to to connect it up, and even going to writing events, which of course I haven't been to many in Melbourne, in Victoria recently, but the last year. But writing events is often a lot of conversations that are very psychological in nature. And I used to feel a bit worried and thinking, oh, they're going into some territory here around trauma, or, you know, something there that I'd be sitting there and my psychologist hat would jump on when I'm there as an audience member at a writers' festival. And then over time I started to see, well, people are not quite as fragile sometimes as you think, and often there's a lot of safety in those spaces, that if they're set up nicely and a really, you know, well supported space, that people can get a lot from that. So I started to kind of relax it a little bit. But yeah, sometimes it's good just to go to something, I think, and not sort of bring your psychologist hat, not jumping out. So for me, that's going to the soccer and Melbourne Victory, who won very, very beautifully on Friday night. So I don't know what's happened. They've got a different coach, but they won very well after having been very badly defeated for most of the season. So I try not to get into any psychology around that. That's not my thing.
Was that against Western?
Western United, which is
5-1 or something?
6-1, and that's the team that's closest to where I live. So I go to the soccer with one of my daughters and my sister and some friends, and we were debating up whether we should go to Western United and change from Melbourne Victory, and some of us were keen and some weren't, but the other night it's like, lucky we didn't jump ship because they're coming through. So yeah, I don't do any sports psychology type things. I just like to go and do that. That's quite separate. But the writing stuff I find very hard to separate from that. That's interesting.
That's fascinating. Your play that you wrote, autobiographical to some extent. Amazing. Wow. Where was it performed?
Well, it was in a little community where I used to live. So it's you know, it's a fairly small thing, and I've written some since that haven't been accepted because it's pretty competitive. But it was quite interesting. It was about me coming back to this town as an adult that I'd lived there in my adolescence, and it was down on the coast in Victoria, and the mutton birds would come back so they'd migrate and then they'd come back. So I had this sort of juxtaposition of the mutton birds coming back and then me coming back. And
that's so cool.
Life as an adult. So it was pretty confronting though. Anyway, we've done the thing about who are we talking about here, haven't we?
Oh, that's so cool though.
From one to another. I think it's probably time that we open up. If people have got some questions, you want to turn your camera on or just speak up, that would be really good, I think. So we've got a bit of time for that. But while we're waiting for people to maybe do that, any kind of tips, Brian, if we're thinking about, and I know there's some supervisors here as well, so not everyone's an intern, but if we're thinking about people at their various stages as an intern, some I know are just starting off, like Janice, because we're going to start working together this week, but others maybe at different stages. What tips would you have for them in terms of what you think is important for them to get through this journey, this part of their journey?
I think I remember in the early stages, I think we touched on it before about being serious, and this is a serious profession, and we're doing serious work, and I think I still do to an extent put a lot of pressure on myself and ourselves to solve the situation, to make things better, to fix it. And I think that can get us into, it can be very stressful for one, and it can be a bit unhelpful for two. And it doesn't necessarily result in us fixing anything. So I think it's useful to just not try and fix things, and to take the pressure off ourselves as well. And I don't know about you, Lynn, but I know I've been, I've gone from high confidence to chronic insecurity, and I'm much more insecure as a psychologist than I ever was before as an actor or whatever. And I think backing ourselves, just to back ourselves, that no matter what, I remember feeling as an intern so green, even as a 42-year-old, however old I was, 30, 39, 40, feeling so green. But to not discount the 6 years of training, all the reading, all the life you've led, you're coming to any session with an individual with a wonderful breadth of experience that you can leverage, and you're not green. the client is green. They're unfamiliar in the psychological space, probably, but we're not green. And so I think even as interns, and remembering that that we got stuff to offer.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I often talk about that as well, because it's very, that imposter syndrome, I think for all of us is never far away. It can easily sneak in, particularly if we're feeling like we're not making progress or we're confronted with something that's a bit new. And when I first went back into private practice, I just went and bought all these books again and just reading. I need to know about trauma, because that wasn't such a big deal 10 years ago when I was working in schools, and I need to know the latest things. And then kind of just got back to that point of I just need to be present, and the more I'm distracting myself thinking I need to know the perfect thing to do, I'm actually losing sight of what I'm doing here. And so obviously we have to keep learning, we have to keep doing that, and you've got to be able to sort of justify what you're doing and why you're doing it. But being there and trusting yourself, I think, is a really important thing to be able to hold on to. And we've done more training than a lot of health professionals, that's for sure, in terms of even the 4 years and then the ongoing what we do through internships. It's more than a lot of health professionals who are out there doing the work.
I think so. Yeah.
So does anyone want to turn on their camera and ask some questions, some things that you'd like Brian to talk about a little bit more, or some things that I haven't asked him about yet? Because we've got 10 minutes or so. It'd be good to have your input. I think I saw someone write a message before, but I didn't quite catch it. Was that you, Cheryl? Did you?
That was me when you were talking about the lived experience,
Yes.
the mental health academy. I subscribed to the suicide training, and I was listening to it the other Thursday, and they were talking about just that, the lived experience, and how important those people were in policy change, and also being at the coalface to help others. They were comparing it to 10 years ago or even 20 years ago, when they didn't have a voice, and they're saying, that these people are really important, and they were actually calling them experts to be able to help with that presentation or suicide. Yeah,
and it's really interesting, Cheryl, having done this work with Workplace Mental Health Institute, whose main game is facilitating workshops in businesses to help them build mentally healthier workplaces. Lived experience is one of the big deals which they've talked about, and there's been a massive change in the last 7 or 8 years in terms of people with lived experience presenting internally in organisations, and really it's really cool. And certainly it's been a big deal in sport as well, and academia. It's and construction.
And I guess I see that with my work in Relationships Australia. I run the Parenting After Separation program, and currently I'm co-facilitator with a younger lady who doesn't have children, but the first question of the participants are, do you have children? And she finds it a bit awkward, and we were discussing that the other day, how she could better do that, because she feels like they're judging her. And I said, they're not judging you, they're just asking a question, so take that off yourself, give you permission. So we workshop some ideas that she might be able to do going ahead in the future, because she's worked with a lot of youth at risk, youth in shelters and stuff like that. So and our population some of those kids, so those parents have got those, on the verge of that sort of thing. So she knows a lot about that. Don't know where I was going with that, but
I think that is one of the trickiest ones, is, are you a parent? And if you're not a parent, or even if you are, you might not want to be sort of having that as a focus. So I think, often that is the case, if that you're younger than the client, that kind of thing, that what do you know? Or, for much older clients, it's, that feeling that, what can I share? They've had a whole life. What can I share? So that can come up, I think, quite a bit.
And it comes back to what you and Brian were saying. We've got 6 years we're highly trained, and we may or may not have had your exact experience, but we do have a lot of theoretical knowledge. We do have a lot of skills that might be able to help the clients or participants or wherever.
Yeah.
Because the clients don't know what they don't know. And when I was a counsellor, my supervisor said to me, they've been sitting with this problem a lot longer since they known you. And I've always just held that because I thought, oh yeah, they've been sitting with this problem and doing whatever they can to get through a lot longer until they've met you. So you can only help, you know, walk that journey with them, I guess.
Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah. Good points.
Anybody else? Questions or even any comments even to add to what we've been talking about so far?
Hi, Lynn and Brian.
Jane?
It's been really interesting tonight. Thank you so much. I guess I've been listening to the conversation and thinking about our interns and just reflecting on Brian's experience, thinking, wow, it sounds like your internship and your career has been characterised by a lot of interesting transitions and changes. And I'm just, I suppose, interested to hear what you drew on to help you get through some of those transitions and changes, because I think that's often, you know, a big part of the internship. Some of our interns, things change. What's your thoughts and advice on how they can best deal with that?
Great question. I think I leveraged people older and wiser than I was, and in particular with the transition and changes into organizational psychology. Just talked to colleagues about what do I need to do, where am I going. I think I had a lot of conversations because just going into a normal workplace was an unusual thing for me. I think some of my conversations, and with Lawrence as an example, and other supervisors, was about just dealing with the day-to-day work life. So it's not a very useful answer. All I can think of is just leveraging those who are older and smarter than I was. And
Yes, I guess that's what part of the internship is about too, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Wonderful things about being part of the college as well.
Yeah. And I agree. And also keep reflecting, well, why am I doing this thing? What is it that I'm doing, and why am I doing it? And just to keep grounding myself back to what it is I'm trying to do. Where am I heading? What am I aiming for? What do I want? So I was lucky enough I knew what I didn't want as an intern was to go and work in a big organization straight out of coming from acting world. And so I was lucky enough to be able to find somewhere which was much smaller. It was much more niche. It's much quieter. So being connected with what my values were, I think was important as well. Actually, that was really important because that's when it all went a bit pear-shaped 7 years later, when I went into a space where my values weren't aligned anymore, when I went all corporate and big and officey, and it just wasn't me. And I tried to survive that for 2 years. And that was what led, one of the things that led to my crash and burn. So I think importantly to recognize what's really important to you as well to get through those transitions.
Thank
Good
you.
question, Jane.
Yeah, it's interesting. Got you really thinking tonight, Brian.
Yes.
Go away and think about these things some more.
I know.
Do you still do any acting these days? That was something I
don't. I did for a long time do acting, do some corporate entertainment with a bunch of blokes called the Three Waiters, where these waiters pretend Italian, French, they sing opera and stuff like that. I did that for years while I was still a psychologist. I don't do that anymore. The only thing I do now is sing with a bunch of blokes called the Spooky Men's Chorale. So do yourself a favor and YouTube the Spooky Men's Chorale, and you'll see bearded men in black sometimes doing something vaguely amusing.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll all be onto that straight away. How interesting. All right. Well, we're coming up to our time. So is anyone time for one last question or anything from you, Lawrence or Alison, before we finish off and I go back to my isolation in Melbourne?
Oh, and MasterChef.
Myself. MasterChef. Yeah, some people might be waiting for MasterChef. Or Celebrity Apprentice, is that on tonight?
Oh yeah, that's true too.
Not that I watch these shows, of course. Everyone says that, don't they? Oh, I know it's on, but I don't watch it. Bridget, hi.
Hi, good to see you all. And
Hi, Bridget.
What a wonderful, inspiring couple of people. I'm just so excited that you're with COPS. I'm quite a creative in my private life as well, but I try to keep a lid on it because, like you, it's the very serious side of me that when my work hat is on, it's, a very different part that comes out. But Brian, I'm interested to know if, with your acting background, did you ever incorporate any psychodrama or, lots of role plays in your work?
No, never. Acting for me was all musical theatre and lots of singing and acting and dancing and mostly singing and acting. And it was just what I did do was the segue to psychology was the role playing. And so lots of role playing then with businesses. So not psychodrama as much, tiny bit of psychodrama in organizations, but mostly role playing, playing difficult clients, difficult customers. I worked with some psychiatric nurses and doctors and played a difficult, actually that was interesting. In my 20s played mad patients, which I know I'm not allowed to say, but psychiatric patients for doctors. So yeah, that was pretty wacky.
Wow. So empty chair technique, any of that?
No, but I did do a bit of that with a therapist as a patient,
Right.
which was interesting.
Did you find that effective?
Yeah, a little bit. I was too aware of what he was trying to do.
Okay, too much insight there.
Yeah, but yes, I did find value in it, but I would love to know more about it. I don't know enough about it, Bridget. Sounds like you. I should learn from you by the sound of it about that.
Oh, no. I just do a bit of role play with students I work with, and
I think it's good.
I don't like to confront them. I like them to, but I think the role play is very effective, isn't it?
I think so too. I don't do it enough now with my students. In fact, I should. I'll do it more. I think I should.
I feel some new practices coming into place and maybe some more change happening.
Yeah, some creative technique. Yeah. Thank you very much for answering me. I'll just mute myself again.
Thank you, Bridget.
Thanks, Bridget.
All
right. Well, I think we probably should wind up. Lawrence, did you want to say anything or have our last say for the night?
No, Lynn. I think it's been a wonderful chat and really good to catch up with Brian again. After all these years, Brian, I wasn't too pleased with your comment about talking to people who were older than you, but I have to accept that. Jane did ask a really insightful question about what you drew on, to navigate the changes and what can interns draw on. And I think what you really embodied, if I can recall the time that we worked together, was a very deep sense of humble curiosity.
Yeah.
Which really struck me then and continues to strike me now. So thank you for that. And I think it's that quality of not knowing but being curious and wanting to learn and being open to different things, which I think will really encourage interns to grow into what may be possible in a very, very long career. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Lawrence. And thank you for reminding me of that. And if I was ever, I know we're finishing up, but if I was ever to get a tattoo, it would be curious. That's my favorite phrase. Be curious.
Yeah. Well, it's life-giving, isn't it? And really useful as a person, but also in our work, I think, and encouraging people to do that is, it's really interesting. Well, thank you very much, Brian. I found it really, really interesting and feel like we could have kept on talking and talking for a really long time because there's so much to explore and talk about, and have a feeling it'd be great to have you back again in a few years and see where you go next, because it has that feel that things are never sort of staying the same for too long. So it's really interesting and I think inspiring in terms of finding our way, isn't it? It's finding what works for us, the values that we hold, the interests that we hold, and how we keep maintaining our curiosity, perhaps, in terms of changes that we make in different ways, and what psychology gives us to do that. What a rich discipline or a rich profession to be able to do this and to tap into all of those interests that we have. So I think you've been a fabulous example of that. So thank you very much for your time tonight and for agreeing to be in the hot seat and answering all those questions and thinking about some things that are tricky. And people are saying thanks and well done.
Go Swans.
Go Swans, yeah. Hello, Swan supporter.
Thank you, Lynn. It's been fantastic to learn a bit about you as well. I know it was obviously about me, but talk to you, and we're very fortunate. It was really a pleasurable hours, lovely hours.
Yeah, good. And thanks everyone for joining us, giving up your Sunday night and joining us and being here, because it's much nicer to have people who are actually listening at the time, but the recording will be there so you can tell other people about it and they can catch up with it later. So another comment, good to be curious. So that's probably a nice point to finish, isn't it? So be curious, everybody. Go and have a look at, what was that group again, Brian? What do we have to go and look at on YouTube?
Oh, the Spooky Men's Chorale.
Okay, Spooky Men's Chorale.
Very good version. It's now politically incorrect, so they don't do it anymore. They did a very good version of Staying Alive, but called Bahari Gib instead of Bahar. So Bahari, Bahari Gib. Anyway, whatever.
All right. Well, brace yourself before you watch it, maybe, but that sounds pretty interesting. All right. Thanks very much, Brian. Thanks, everyone. See you later.
Thank you. Wonderful evening.
Thanks,
guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Lynn. Thank you. It was wonderful.
Bye.